Speaker.
Carmel Cipollone, 5-minute call.
Mr. Speaker, just standing in support of this bill, because Labor does support this bill. And it's good, Mr. Speaker, to see this bill finally come before the House. It was introduced by the former Minister of Justice, Judith Collins, but she was never put forward for debate, despite saying she would by the end of 2013. So just reflecting on the purpose of the bill, Mr. Speaker, the aim of this bill is to strengthen the law to combat organised crime and corruption. And we on this side of the House certainly are in support of that. The bill allows New Zealand to ratify the United Nations Convention Against Corruption and enables implementation of the agreement between the Government of the United States of America and the Government of New Zealand on enhancing cooperation in preventing and combating crime. So we heard earlier some of our speakers talk about the importance of the ranking that we get internationally with Transparency International. In the past, New Zealand has always ranked very high in terms of having a transparent and accountable government. We are concerned, Mr. Speaker, that given recent events, that ranking may be negatively affected, particularly given some of the recent scandals that the national government have been involved in and some of the allegations that have been made against the national government, including some of their ministers, and also implicating, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister with regards to some behaviour that may not be deemed appropriate for any government internationally. So when the upcoming rankings from Transparency International come out, we will be watching very carefully to see whether or not the national government's antics, the national government's unhealthy engagement with, what shall we call them? What types of characters are they? Unseemly characters. Whether or not those relationships and those connections have an impact on our own ranking internationally in terms of transparency. And this is very important in terms of how other countries look at us, in terms of how we are perceived on the world stage. And we have always taken great pride in the fact that we are seen as a country that is not affected by any level of corruption at the government level. So we will be watching very carefully, Mr. Speaker. We have a proud tradition of being an honest nation, which takes a strong stance against organised crime and corruption. For this, we have been rewarded with a consistent rank that is amongst the least corrupt countries in the world. However, as I said, Mr. Speaker, in recent years, this has changed substantially with a lessening of transparency from this government and multiple flagrant examples of corruption, including, to name one of many, Judith Collins' own trip to China to promote her husband's company, Organised, which I'm sure we in this House are all aware of, the media is aware of, and the general public are only too aware of. The irony is, Mr. Speaker, that Collins was actually on a trip to China to speak about reducing corruption, yet she was visiting Organised to further her own or her husband's business ties. National continue to look after themselves and the privileged few at the expense of Kiwis. I think we've seen that. There is concern generally across the public about that, and that type of behaviour can have an impact on the perception around how transparent we are, whether our government is living up to expectations, and just whether or not they are living up to the expectations in terms of accountability that you would expect from any first world country. Mr. Speaker, nowhere was shown more clearly than in recent revelations in the dirty politics books about the concerns that the country has around corruption. It was a real eye-opener for the whole country, I think, with respect to, for instance, the fact that some friends of the National Party could access Official Information Act requests much faster than the media or other politicians seeking to hold the government to account. There was concern about the corrupt nature of that, Mr. Speaker. The circumstances surrounding the resignation of Judith Collins are actually a national disgrace, and I think we need to really take that into consideration and touch on that when we're looking at this particular bill, which ironically was supposed to be introduced to the House by the former Minister of Justice, Judith Collins, but never got to that point. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ian McKelvey.